Makes me want to share something of my own. I'm tired of being hip.
Finally, someone says it.
This is way better than kale.
Kale sucks.
It is 81 degrees out. Why am I wearing this beanie?
Exactly.
I don't even know what this tattoo means.
Kombucha is garbage water.
Yeah.
Guys, so I did the thing. Welcome to my little hipster abode of niche coffee orders and fixie bikes. As you can tell, liking Helvetica is my only source of identity today. Now, I know what you're thinking. These were here when I moved in. Ask my landlord, I swear. He looks good. Okay, so just like the rest of you, I also stumbled across that Kyle Gordon song, We Are Young. Hey! The stomp stomp clap, hey, really brings me back. And with these clearly making rounds in shops again, I thought, it's a sign. The time has come. My friends, it is high time to open that can of worms again. Millennial-core, or the continuation of bashing of my generation, but now aptly rebranded with a core suffix to make it sound fresh. Gen Z are having a moment with it, mocking, parodying and cringing about millennial ways, but what they don't know is, we've been here before. This is not our first rodeo, friends. From skinny jeans, through naive optimism and internet goofiness, to burger joints and cereal cafes. Cereal cafes, oh my god. It's essentially a new gen hipster critique of 2010s. And for the last couple of weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I decided that we are going to revisit the now ancient and long forgotten word hipster.
What are hipsters called now? I was like, oh yeah, I went to this concert last night and there were a bunch of hipsters there. No one says that anymore.
And all the, what appears in retrospect, confusing and confounding legacy of millennial hipster criticism. Hi, I'm Aesthety, your favorite aesthetic historian, and today we are delving into 2010s and revisiting the phenomenon of the hipster, its origins, its fashion and aesthetics, its mode of expression, and we are going to reinvestigate a conflicting critique it inspired at the time.
What kind of a fucking douchebag names her store after a font?
I know, right? The coffee is so good.
A critique that led us to today's cringe about millennial-core. So buckle up, friends, find those goddamn Ray-Ban wafers, put on a Feist song or whatever 1975 is doing these days, and delve with me into the world of overpriced nitro cold brews and ironic graphic t-shirts. If you're a millennial, please do enjoy walking down the memory lane. If you're Gen Z, please don't be afraid. I know you are in the enemy territory, but truce. Okay, so without further ado, welcome to Millennial-core, revisiting the 1910s hipster critique, aesthetic analysis.
1. The origins.
So as always, first some history. So the term hipster stemmed from the 1940s word hep, which in the world of Black American jazz culture meant cool or being in the know. We can trace back its first usage to 1938 Cab Calloway's Hipster Dictionary, a language of jive. A hipster, hepster, or a hep cat, as they were called, was a member of, initially, black subculture, revolving around jazz music, swing dancing, talking jive, recreational Mary Jane use, and the overall looser attitudes. Doing all of that dressed in a swanky pork pie hat, slick Kong hairdo, and a drapey zoot suit. You might have seen this guy without even knowing. If you ever seen that Tom and Jerry episode growing up, that is an original hipster.
Oh, smell a little fella. Now you call him a jive. You're on the right side, you alligator, you.
By the way, if you haven't seen this episode in a while, do give it a rewatch, cause I'm seeing it right now and my dude, does it have a dialogue.
Boy, are you corny. You act like a square at the fair. So bail out, brother. Get lost. And here's your rat, cat.
But jokes aside, that 40s subculture was not only about leisure and appearing as cool. It was also about a sense of connoisseurship around jazz, adding to it a dash of edge and alternative streak. Hipsters were all about bebop and the so-called hot jazz, a fast and highly creative kind with a tempo upwards to 200 BPM, when at the time, in the mainstream, jazz itself was more and more slowing down and mellowing into swing and big band genre, with the purpose of making itself more digestible to the wider audience.
Moon and the stars, the objects on Mars.
Boy, are you corny.
Hipsters believed that their music got watered down by squares. Now class, squares, put a pin in it, we're gonna get back to it, alright? Squares. 40s hipsters' legacy was their influence on perceiving jazz musicians as avant-garde artists with cult following, rather than a mere cookie-cutter entertainers providing elegant background noise in fancy restaurants. It wasn't long when white youth began to frequent black communities for their music and dance. Soon, a large chunk of them had diverged from the mainstream culture altogether, blending with a black hipster while cultivating his philosophy of cultural transgression. But this is where the analogy to our contemporary hipster really ends. If we look into more organic and intellectual reasoning of its origin, the 21st century hipster had more in common with the beatnik. The term beatnik was coined by San Francisco Chronicle columnist Herb Keane in 1958 as a derogatory label for the followers of the Beat Generation, a group of influential writers and artists of their era. Beatniks were members of a social movement in the mid-20th century America who subscribed to an anti-materialistic lifestyle. They've seen the peak 50s American consumerism and rejected it altogether, and with it the conformity and conservatism that surrounded American culture.
Like, I mean, what are they doing with their lives? Truly shocking, man.
They experimented with spirituality, drugs, sexuality, and travel. They expressed themselves through various forms of art, such as literature, poetry, music, and painting.
My soul squeezed in the hydraulic press of eternal drip, drip, drip.
Intellectualized and often self-imposed poverty, along with sense of abstaining from cultural constraints, was their badge of honor. They frequented coffee houses, bookstores, bars, where they listened to jazz, read poetry, discussed philosophy, and engaged in political activism. Does that sound familiar? And, just like hipsters, beatniks often were stereotyped via their perceived pretentiousness to a point of ridicule, depicted wearing black clothing, berets, sunglasses, and goatees, and speaking in hip slang that incorporate words like cool, dig, groovy, and square. That caricature of beatnik is prevalent in mass media.
For your information, this is how deep people dress.
Oh man! Ned's spilled ink all over my poems. He's a real flat tire. I mean a cube, man. He's putting us on the train to Squaresville, Mona.
Having such a well-defined visual indicators to broadcast your subversion and anti-materialism, it wasn't long when the term became co-opted by the machinery of capitalism. Kerouac biographer Ann Chardis noted that the term beatnik was appropriated to become a marketing tool of their day. The term caught on because it could mean anything. It could even be exploited in affluent wake of the decade's extraordinary technological inventions. Almost immediately, for example, advertisements by hip record companies in New York used the idea of the Beat Generation to sell their new long-playing vinyl records. By the 80s, and its rampant consumerism fueled by Reagan's dysregulation and sheer corporate greed, the cool was no longer at the periphery of materialism, but at its very centerfold. And as we know from Huey Lewis' 1986 song, it's hip to be square. No more beatniks, no more hipsters, not one thing against the other. It's all the same. The hip factor as a mainstream everyday marketing tool reached its peak in the 90s, with 1994 Times magazine featuring a cover with the title, "Everybody's Hip." In a separate article, "If Everyone is Hip, Is Anyone Hip?", Richard Lecayo argued that the clever marketing had made hipness a special condition almost everyone in America seems to aspire to. He writes, "At a time when pavements are worn thin by Doc Martens, when every open door admits a file of backward baseball caps and sore patches, when jocks sell attitude and all of rock is supposed to be alternative, hipness is bigger than General Motors. When the ironies of Jerry Seinfeld and David David Letterman occupied the best time slots on television, and even the president's daughter is named after Joni Mitchell's song. Well, may I add, worth remembering, he himself having penchant for playing sax and being blown by its intern, Hypness is giving off a rhythmic creak. It's true that nothing is more difficult to pin down than a sensibility of an era, and nothing harder to trace with certainty than its rise and fall. But in a society so adept at distributing the very last thing and bestowing an edge upon the most unremarkable consumer fodder, it's impossible to recognize that hip is losing its force, muddling its message and becoming just another sales pitch. So, if in the 80s it was hip to be square, by the 90s it became square to be hip. The hip was in desperate need of subversive makeover, and it found its way through the art school. In the late 90s, a widespread restructuring of the arts education had happened. Tony Blair's administration in 1987 established a creative industries unit and task force, which sound very serious for no reason, making creative industries one of its administration's main focuses. The reform applied globally from US, UK and Australia to Brazil, India and South Korea, aimed at moving art school away from government subsidization into a pioneer of creative industry, placing itself at the cutting edge of budding information flow and knowledge economies caused by the rapid transformation in digital technology. Or to put more simply, it was about reconceptualizing cultural production in relation to dot-com era of economic growth. All of the liberal art courses geared towards tapping into the digital and into the fresh and cool. Your local art school brochure suddenly looked like Nike ads. Creative became a buzzword. It was less about, say, typesetting on a printing press and more about creating a cool indie magazine. Fashion schools became less concerned with creating seamstresses and more with creating a superstar designers. The art graduate became an it guy. Richard Florida famously coined his theory in 2003 of the creative class, an up-and-coming subset of young adults in the early aughts who will fuel the economy across the board with the upcoming digital renaissance, leading to economic growth and prosperity. What followed is that late 90s, early 2000s boom of indie, in art, in music, in design, in fashion, the subsets of creative cultures fueling the mill, a creative quickly pigeonholed by some normies as hipster. Here we are again. In 2003, the Hipster Handbook, Williamsburg writer Robert Lanham describes hipsters as young people with mop-top haircuts, swinging retro pocketbooks. Pocketbooks, Jesus. Talking on cell phones, smoking European cigarettes. It was your typical Gen X creative, a Noel Gallagher looking guy, working in Vice or Wired, listening to Aphex Twin and popping Molly somewhere on the bench of some musty old Shoreditch pub. But these guys weren't regarded as hipsters by wider public, not in a way that the later hipsters were. They were just edgy Gen X creatives who some NPCs tried to ridicule. Okay, so let's summarize. So we have a fertile ground of rows of young adult graduates coming up from freshly restructured system of arts education propped up by government support and economic growth and a digital optimism. But for the final recipe of a modern hipster, we need two more ingredients. One, the Web 2.0 revolution. The initial internet was the so-called 1.0 internet, and it was characterized by static one-way experience. Websites without comment section, no feedback, just static port of information. Posting things was like a man standing on top of the hill screaming into the ether. The switch to Web 2.0 meant a more dynamic experience with focus on interaction. It was all about user-generated content now. Comments, likes, and the whole social networking shebang. Just imagine the shift, and the freshness, and the potential. Here comes the blogs, the forums, the tweets, the rankings, the tumblers, the video exchange, the flow of image sharing. Posting and commenting, gathering following, all freshly devised, all waiting to be exploited. And two, the 08 economic crash. The crash of 08 brought about disenchantment with the establishment and further propelled the search for the alternatives. the alternatives in careers, business models, but also in fashion, in arts, and in culture. Yet again, we became distrustful with rampant mainstream consumerism and globalism. In consequence, there is a push for locality of markets, the local sourcing of things, turned towards neighborhood, community, and collaboration. The crash also brought about an intense sense of cynicism, but also an immense sense of nostalgia. Just like it is today, with things going downhill, we always look back. That sense of nostalgia was dictated by the worrying uncertainty of the contemporary world. Hence the push for all things vintage. From thrifted clothes themselves to entire old styles and old modes of media such as vinyl records and film photography. Focus on local over the global. Craftsmanship over mass production. Hobbies over career. Vintage over new. Propelled by an arts degree that given them the cultural know-how and facilitated through the Web 2.0 sheer force to furnish it all with it. Here they are. The hipsters.
2. The peak.
2008 to 2015, young creative millennials setting up in a rundown corner somewhere in Williamsburg and Bushwick in New York, Shoreditch and Hoxton in London, Berlin's Kreuzberg, Stockholm's Sudelman, LA Silver Lake, in order to find cheap housing, practice their art, their craft, and their artisanal business venture. But my boyfriend's in a band. He plays guitar while I sing and read. I'm a Brooklyn baby. On one hand, there is this affinity for all things vintage, beatnik attitude, Edwardian grooming, Victorian industrial spaces, the 50s nerd aesthetic, the folk music, working class credo, barbers, lumberjacks, library girls with Peter Pan collars and tennis skirts, picking up anything and everything seemingly forgotten by globalizing world of shining Y2K before its crash, rebranding it as desirable again. The vinyl listening, the old photo cameras, thrift hauls, deconstruction of bikes, armed with shiny new MacBooks to talk, post, shoot and snap all about it. Your local hipster sitting down in an artisanal coffee shop run by another hipster guy, ordering gluten-free croissant from that hipster place across the street, posting an article about some niche hipster bands he found on those couple of really amazing music blogs run by, guess who? Hipsters. The main factor of appeal of this culture was the embrace of the forgotten by the globalism that just backfired on Wall Street. It was all about alternativeness of your interest that deviated from the ones established by the heavily defined mainstream ruled by the ubiquity of traditional media, and an expertise from you niching down on it. At its hypothetical core, the whole thing revolved around connoisseurship. It was all about looking in, knowing your niche, and knowing what constituted good practices and inner knowledge. It was divorcing the cool from the 90s everyday hipness and its posturing by a mindless consumption into the field of perceived cultural competence. Having something cool wasn't being cool. Being an expert about it was. Hence that push for the whole rebrand of the nerd as someone desirable. Again, niche and expertise. And sure, some really great things came out from the creative class turning its back on mainstream, niching down and channeling their inner streak and knowledge through the internet. There was amazing art that was popping up solely because it happened off of the traditional media circuit. Lily Allen was dropping bangers straight to MySpace. The 12-year-old Tavi Gevinson amazing pen disrupted the fashion elites for the first time. Lena Dunham, I can't believe I'm gonna praise Lena Dunham here, but she wrote Girls for Christ's sake.
I think that I may be the voice of my generation, or at least a voice of a generation.
And so she was. And so she was. But, and there's a big but here, it is all but hypothetical core, right? Because along with genuine credibility of some came the emulation and imitation of tens of others. While ones were locking in on their expertise, honing in on their craft, others sought to align themselves with it with a sheer pretense of differentiation and uniqueness by mere association. One time, Regina George wore Clubmaster Ray-Bans and buffalo plaid shirt, so I wear a Clubmaster Ray-Bans and buffalo plaid shirt. And there comes, my friends, a hipster critique.
3. The critique.
It is worth noting that it is almost impossible to research the subject of hipster without the immense critique that seemed to always tag along. Part of it comes from the fact that the millennial hipster subculture was never centrally defined. No hipster called himself hipster, and that was the most hipster thing to do. There are no hipster books, guides, essays, anything coming from within the subculture about the subculture. Back in the day, to outwardly claim and preach to others that you are in the know what constitutes an inner mechanism of the hipsterdom would instantly position you as cringe master and a poser. You guys remember poser? Do you guys remember calling people poser?
I knew you assholes the minute I laid eyes on you. Look at the four of you! And you're the biggest poser of them all.
I think we should bring it back. We should totally bring it back, you know, because like the 90s grunge guy or 90s skater are turning in their cultural graves if they would find out that in 2025 we do not in fact have any subcultures, but we do have aesthetics. We are dressing as one just for the look. They would love that shit. Let's bring poser back.
I ain't a poser, shoot. I got a PhD, a poser hater degree. Come on.
Yeah, you know I'm just kidding, right? Or am I? Whenever you spoke of hipster, you spoke of others, not you. Those fake trend followers and not a real deal you. This is partially due to the nature of how getting to know all those inner indicators were acquired back in the day. In the early 2000s, there is no ready-made content that in full bluntness would guide you how to be a hipster in a way how today's TikTok tells you how to become an office siren or a clean girl. And it sure as shit wasn't fed to you by algorithm. All the graphics, all the posts and essays, all the new music releases weren't on Spotify recommended or an Instagram feed and had to be found by you personally. Had to be researched. You had to scourge the internet and find some desolate gold mines of blogs, forums and platforms that were able to provide you with the cultural capital. The internet of the late 2000s and early 2010s was still very much decentralized, and it felt personal to take on those journeys.
Being a teenager in the early days of Tumblr and fashion blog internet, when it really felt honest and like unbought, you know, Tavi Gevinson and Susie Bubble, or go on the sartorialist. Internet culture at the time, it was like you had to go in and extract it.
It felt personal to stumble upon a gem, and in turn, this affected an identity making to a much greater extent. You were precious about it. You were keeping it to yourself. That was your whole credo. That's why some of the hipsters were so obnoxious about their niche when they were talking about it, and why we parody it so much.
This is the most magnificent discarded living room set I've ever seen. You're used to listening to the raw power of Iggy and the Stooges. Everything else just sounds kind of like...
It pains me we live in a world where nobody's heard of Spearmint.
Come on, I love Ringo Starr.
Nobody loves Ringo Starr.
That's what I love about him.
Nosferatu music is not my thing. I really only listen to like German death reggae and Halloween sound effects records from the 1950s. And Bette Midler, obviously.
But one thing's for sure, they sure as shit knew how to do their digging. Nobody was asking for a handout when they wanted to find out about something the way they are now on TikTok comment section. You can cringe about millennials all you want, but we damn know how to research. How do you think this video came to be? I can only thank early internet for that. But in retrospect, it's easy to see now why it might seem as gatekeepy, but also why the whole genuine hipster experience is so undocumented from the inside, leaving us in a position where if you want to find out something about a hipster, you have to sift through the lenses of their critics. And boy, was there a critique. And like, sure, some of the critique is quite reasonable. Hipster subculture consisted largely of white middle class. The whiteness was quite a predominant factor, which could appear as problematic considering the adoption of elements of foreign cultures. It regarded the embrace of the practices of communities that said communities themselves were excluded from participating within hipster culture. It was also problematic due to the gentrifying force that came along with setting in urban locations that were previously considered cheap, undesirable, and occupied by minorities and groups within the lower income bracket. The question of gentrification was often raised, as hordes of young creatives flocking to places like Brooklyn or Hackney in order to find cheaper housing and commercial property to set up their niche and artisanal business venture became an economic demarcation of future property price surge. Developers often exploited the appearance of hipsters in the neighborhood as a signaling of the area becoming cool, which was often the case, to be honest. Hence the saying that if you see a guy with a man bun on a Segway or a burger place that serves chips in tin buckets popping up in your area, you should be worried.
What's that? Sorry, I was taking a selfie while shooting a Snapchat, while periscoping that Snapchat, while Instagramming latte art, while Shazamming The Weeknd, while streaming Master of None, while retweeting George Takei, while saying, "This wins the internet," while still being hashtag so bored.
There was also a question of appropriating an intellectualization of working class aesthetics as to appear more grounded and authentic, like the embrace of barber culture or the whole lumberjack spiel, the beard, the suspenders, the shirt. Also the folk music, the whole Mumford & Sons and the Fleet Foxes thing that was so aptly parodied by Kyle Gordon's We Are Young. Hey! But the biggest issue was the issue of differentness and pretense that came along with it. With time and with the progression of the businesses, places and the whole neighborhoods as nests of cool, people started flocking to those areas and assimilating the visual cues of the culture. Soon a hipster became a trend, a fad, a costume of young adult intellectual with pursuits in creative industries of some sort, and many young people were simply following suit to have this kind of peer cred by mere association. And just like Brad Summer, that started as a genuine DIY rave culture moment, spearheaded by Charli XCX, that soon got absorbed by Kamala Harris campaign and every other brand alike. Here comes the age-endemification of hipster, with cheap reproduction of Ray-Ban Wayfarers and Buffalo shirts and Jeffrey Campbell's knockoffs now available in Zara and Urban Outfitters. The question of authenticity of young creative class doing digital renaissance came under scrutiny. Why be a niche independent music curation blogger or a street photographer where you could simply appear as one? People were taking it so far to demarcate themselves as uniquely submerged in alternative narratives that it really reached the point of ridiculous pretense. It's hard to look at these pics and not to cringe, even for a millennial. This is pretense at its most pretentious. Oh my god, you're so indie, girl, I love it, wow. These were genuine criticism that were legitimate. However, the criticism doesn't end here, and this is where my understanding of it really ends. Because what initially started as a genuine criticism mutated into this catch-all throwing of the punches. Young millennials curtailing the meat industry by eating avocados on toast. Young millennials clogging up coffee shops. Young millennials ruining traditional media with blogs and Instagrams. Young millennials affecting the local business with competition? Okay. By 2015, millennials became an ultimate scapegoat generation. Yeah, can't believe I'm going there. And it really gotten super far. For instance, while researching for this video, I attempted to read the 2021 Hipster Culture, Transnational and Intersectional Perspectives edited by Hanke Steinhoff, and I really struggled with sifting through it in search of any objectivity or impartiality. If you try to read this book in order to understand the culture from within, you'll be hard-pressed to do so. Because what this book ends up as is not an analysis of hipster culture, but an unintentional poster child of hipster backlash phenomenon that was so emblematic of the era. It doesn't say enough about the core subject itself, as it does the ever-present glaring finger-pointing at it and blaming it for every problem that came along with it at the time. Look, number 5. Pastiche and pastoral. Hipsters ruining farming by romanticizing labor and produce. Okay. 3. Global hipsterification. The Etsyization and Airbnbization of the global urbanscape. 7. The irony of the hipster beard. Faking one's performative masculinity and reinforcing patriarchy. Yeah, because Hipster is famous founding father of manosphere. Or even the mere chapter titles. 11. The line, the niche, and the bathrobe. The white male writer hipster as a trope. Or 12. The straight queer. Hipster appropriation in the works of James Franco. Jesus, it is one big chilling lament in the form of a printed book that feeds each author's own self-importance at the cost of riding the hipster hate wave. Hating hipsters. Groundbreaking. Fun fact, the guy that wrote the chapter, The Irony of the Hipster Beard, admitted to himself having a beard in the book. Shocker. On the other occasion, in the same very chapter, he stated that it may be that critics derive the category hipster define as inauthentic in order to present themselves as the authentic inverse and thus confirming their own social and cultural validity. Self-awareness is, in fact, a virtue. He's not like other guys. Remember, it's not him, it's them. And here is this prevalent culprit of the hipster critique. The philosophy of it's not me, it's them. The volumes and volumes of highbrow essays of the era, denominating the criticisms of hipster practices, became a way to demarcate one's own authenticity, expertise, the real dealness. And while for the non-creative part of society that for whatever reason was biased against hipsters, the name soon come to mean essentially anyone and everyone with a hobby. If you were a DJ, a barista, a writer, or a guy who just liked sauerkraut, hipster, 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 hipster. On the other hand, for the contemporary intelligentsia, it was a way to participate in the hypocrisy of building one's alternative credo by putting down your peers for doing the very same you do. It's not me, it's them, officer, it's them! I swear those Ray-Bans are prescription only and I was wearing them before this was cool. For Slavoj Žižek, and I am aware of the irony, quoting the guy here, any analysis of the hipster who he claims is always presented as an objective rather than subjective phenomenon, must start with the perspective of the accusatory subject, the not I. The difficulty of speaking about the hipster as if one is outside of its grasp was apparent after the 2009 symposium on the end of the hipster, organized by Mark Gief at the New School in New York, which spawned accusation that the staging of the symposium itself was a product of, guess what? Being a hipster. As Rob Horning, one of the speakers, later recounted about the event, it's impossible to obtain objective distance from hipsterism. If you are concerned enough about the phenomenon to analyze it and discuss it, you are already somewhere on the continuum of hipsterism and are in the process of trying to rid yourself of its taint. Don't look at me, I am doing hipster analysis after it was cool. So, in a nutshell, the older people were calling everyone with a hobby a hipster, the wider consumer obsessed with the cool marketing were scoffing at the connoisseurship is cool as pretense, and the hipsters themselves were separating and absolving themselves from the notion by voracious criticism of the phenomenon. Soon, everyone was pointing fingers at anyone screaming hipster for anything deviating from the norm like it was a cardinal sin. It was like a Spanish Inquisition but for culture in 2013. And like, yeah, some of it was warranted. Was some of them pretentious and phony? Sure.
And I don't give a shit about anything, yet I simultaneously have opinions about everything.
Was there a millennial behavior on the internet? The pugs and bacon, the pizza, the adulting cringy? You bet. But in a wider context, looking at it years ahead, and with the whole social media and influencer culture behind our belt, I can't get rid of the impression that what the critique essentially boiled down to was young adults congregating in places having hobbies? Like, make it make sense. We also now, with a hindsight, know that many things weren't hipsters' fault, really. Beard and patriarchy? Please, look at manosphere today. Do you really think that those mouth-breathing incels came from guys who like Wes Anderson, Bukowski, and wrote indie movie script in a coffee shop on the typing machine? Really? Gentrification? Sure, they were a signifier of it, But the true cause was the greed of the real estate industry. Is young people looking for cheap housing post-2008 crash really that outrageous? There's no hipsters in 2020s, yet the housing market is at its worst. And we sure as shit know who's to blame today. Whiteness? Yes, but to a point. When Kanye West put those shutter glasses on and indie scene got enamored with the hype beast Obey and the supreme shtick of the hip-hop, dancing to Barbra Streisand together. Barbra Streisand. Ooh, Barbra Streisand. If the hipster started as a white thing, it didn't stay white very long, which is good. Tech, the dissemination of social media and curtailing of the traditional one, yeah, but it's the tech bros, not the hipsters, which wasn't differentiated at all at the time. Zuckerberg has as much in common with Lena Dunham as Marie Antoinette with Jay-Z. Just because hipsters like MacBooks and flat design and Helvetica, it didn't really affect the entirety of society in a way that we blame them. All of that while simultaneously the hipsterism was an increasingly more desirable and disseminated trait by the mainstream. In 2010, seemingly everyone hated on hipster, while secretly everyone wanted to be one. Or so it seems. How else can you explain the H&M's and Zara's and we got oat milk in Starbucks too? The early Instagram pretending to be lomography via hipstamatic filter, referencing the analog hobby. I have no idea how this works. How do you do this? These stomp clap sounds present in almost every commercial geared towards young people. And as it usually happens with any social phenomenon in popular culture, the hipster got dissolved in later years of 2010s by two mechanisms.
4. The Demise.
A. Absorption. Any good and desirable trait developed by millennial hipster got absorbed by the mainstream culture, essentially killing off their demarcation as alternative. The choices of non-dairy milks, the coffee shops that aren't soulless franchises, the bring your tote bag to do your shopping, all of that was hipster indicator before. Saying gluten-free was the surest way to receive an eye roll. And still, somehow, the whole world ended up baking its own bread during a lockdown. Part of it was assimilated to the rise of the influencer culture. In 2025, when you think of yoga or mindfulness, you don't really think of an obnoxious hipster. You think of a health content girly that made bank, yet again rebranding the same hobby to fit the 2020s mechanisms of digital economy. Most of the guys that were droning on to their friends about different guitar pedals or bikes or kombucha or Swiss-style poster grid now do it on TikTok and have massive following. It's just normal to have a niche and bank on it in culture that is digital first, and we don't really think about it. We all have hobbies now, and unlike 15 years ago, almost all of us are having social media accounts. In 2010, society was largely merely a spectator, so it was easy to point fingers and laugh, and the whole awareness of the personal brand is almost given. Therefore, we are much more forgiving, so we don't point fingers in public about one's uniqueness anymore. B. Mass media appropriation. While some of the hipster indicators became normal things of the everyday organically, others were constructed, scripted, and integrated into the mainstream, popularized and watered down to a point of ridicule.
Told you before, I don't want your kind in here. Take a trendy hike. Better step it up, the Apple Store closes at 10.
There's always this need in capitalist society to jump on the newest hot thing, appropriating it to the widest audience possible by diluting any nuance and reinforcing the most laughably archetypal elements to create a quick and marketable stereotype. To bring back the example of beatniks to the conversation, Lee Strife put it brilliantly. Reporters are not generally well versed in artistic movements or the history of literature or art, and most are certain that their readers or viewers are of limited intellectual ability and must have things explained simply in any case. Thus, the reporters in the media tried to relate something that was new to already pre-existing frameworks and images that were only vaguely appropriate in their efforts to explain and simplify. With a variety of oversimplified and conventional formulas at their disposal, they fell back on the nearest stereotypical approximation of what the phenomenon resembled, as they saw it. And even worse, they did not see it clearly and completely at that. They got a quotation here and a photograph there, and it was their job to wrap it up in a comprehensible package. And if it seemed to violate the prevailing mandatory conformist doctrine, they would also be obliged to give it a negative spin as well. Thus, what came out in the media, from newspapers, magazines, TV, and the movies, was a product of the stereotypes of the 30s and 40s, though garbled of a cross of a 1920s Greenwich Village bohemian artist and a bop musician whose visual image was completed by mixing in Dali-esque paintings, a beret, a Van Dyke beard, a turtleneck sweater, a pair of sandals, a set of bongo drums. A few authentic elements were added to the collective image. Poets reading their poems, for example, but even this was made unintelligible by making all the poets speak in some kind of phony bop idiom. The consequence is that even though we may know now that these images do not actually reflect the reality of the beat movement, we still subconsciously look for them when we look back at the 50s. We have not even yet completely escaped the visual imagery that has been so insistently forced upon us. It is a typification of sorts. That's what mainstream always does. Strips away and codify to make it quickly digestible at the expense of nuance, of, at times, truth. Hence, upon filtering of the filtering of the filtering, we have a hipster with a mustache squiggle on his finger, riding a fixie bike in a horn-rimmed glasses, and a burger places catering to them. Two young guys with a crazy idea.
Bro, this is the most millennial space I have ever been in. It feels like Facebook was created here.
Indie folk music off of a forgotten blog covered by a no-name royalty-free band used as a hey-ho positive affirmation in the background of whatever narrative is happening on screen. Hipster became a youthful, lobotomized, happy-go-lucky trooper with a hat and a skinny jeans. My whole point of this video comes to this. It's important to understand two things here. Who does the mocking and what is it that is really being mocked here? Because after years of bashing millennials, firstly by elders, those pesky youths with their oat milks, why can't you drink a goddamn normal milk? Through their peers, oh my god, you watch Portlandia and ironically, ew, that's pretty chuggy. Anyways, have you read my latest Substack about the postmodern condition through the Ubermensch and the Husserlian duality present in his SpongeBob SquarePants? Now, with young hipster millennial critique dressed as millennial-core. And calling it core really gives away who does the naming. The Gen Z comes into the fold. And my question, in all sincerity, are you sure that you with your mullet hair and a mustache, pearl necklace, tote bag, Chapel Run album, fax note printer and mood lighting self are really the one to talk about burger joints and mason jar drinks? And honestly, I'm not judging, don't get me wrong, I love you guys, I really do. But guess what, sweets? By the lens of wider cultural discussion, you are the very epitome of a hipster, just redressed in wider pants. The difference is, no one cares anymore. Every facet of what demarcated you as a whole generation is really a remix and retake of a hipster. Since there is no obsession with critique of a hipster, which was just a cover-up for criticizing anything different. Since you can peacefully be yourself and dress up as a mob wife or whatever without committing to anything ideologically, and that is fine today. So maybe, just maybe, an idea: do not scoff at those who had to crawl so you can run. And simply stop bullying a generation that was institutionally bullied their whole life for the most random things. And as for the other part, what is really criticized here is not really and truly a millennial, but a warped husk of an archetype of a millennial, a commercialization and ridiculed appropriated by mass media. Just like the beatnik with his turtleneck, the "we are young" is not what millennial was, but what the commercial world absorbed and spewed out back to us. Oversimplification to a point of unconscious parody in ceaseless search of gaining dollars at whatever cost necessary. So truly who the enemy is not your run-of-the-mill millennial or whoever is on the target at the time. It is the mechanism of culturally cannibalistic mode of capitalism laying waste to yet another expression of one's young generation. If you see a depiction that parades in repeated visual signifiers and behaves in a way that is culturally ridiculously literal, know that what you're interacting with is not the thing, but a distorted market regurgitation of culture it seeks to depict. And it is that capitalist process of dilutive stereotypification that should, in all truth, really be ridiculed by all of us. But one day, you'll turn on your laptop or your TV, and just like every generation before you, you will see for yourself. Alright, thank you very much for watching, guys. I really hope it's not going to be another long one. What did you think of the hipster critique? Because it was quite interesting for me to revisit these times, not only from the perspective of walking down the memory lane, but also from raising issues with the criticisms that were at the time. What do you guys think of it? Also, please do consider supporting me on Patreon. That really helps, guys. I would love to make those videos more often for you, and I would love to make a living out of it so I can focus really on reading all the books and do the editing and do the, you know, the whole shebang. And really, as little as just $2 a month would make a whole difference to me. So if you like what I'm doing here, if you like my work, if you like all the inputs and effort I'm putting into it, it really makes a difference. Please do consider that, and please do appreciate my fit, because believe it or not, I actually found that in store, and I don't know, whatever the design team was thinking, but this is freshly new and I need to give it back because I'm not gonna keep it. So yeah, also like, comment, subscribe, as always, you know the drill. And one final look at you, because honey, you do look amazing. So as always, until next time.